He's mocked, indicted, and endlessly scrutinized. Yet Donald Trump is once again shaping the global order with a handshake, not a missile. So here's the question. If peace, investment, and national pride are being restored, then why are so many people in Washington terrified? Before we dive into the commentary, please like and subscribe to Worldview Today, so you won't miss our unique takes on global current affairs. Let's be honest. No one saw this coming. Not the press, not the think tanks, not the people who have made a career out of predicting Trump's downfall. Because while they were panicking over polls and indictments, something bigger was happening. An explosion of investment, a stock market rebound, and a diplomatic wave stretching from Riyadh to Tehran. And no, it wasn't a fluke. It was Trump. Again. A man they swore would crash the economy has now erased the 2025 market losses. A man they accused of igniting inflation has instead watched it begin to cool even under tariffs. And while Democrats hyperventilate over his every sentence, federal courts quietly upheld his power to remove illegal immigrants using a statute written in 1798. So tonight we examine what the media won't. Not just the results of Trump's latest diplomatic push, but what they reveal about his long game, the dealmaker, the peacemaker, the realist, and the eternal optimist, all converging in one man in one moment on the global stage. Let's start in Saudi Arabia. The numbers speak first. $283 billion in deals. $142 billion of that from defense contracts, from tanks to missiles to submarines. Another $20 billion pledged to AI infrastructure and data centers. Then from the Saudi Investment Forum, an additional 145 deals totaling over $300 billion. That's over $1 trillion in combined investments, trade flows, and promises, much of it pointing straight back to the U.S. And what was the reaction? Smiles. Applause. CEOs from Google, Uber, OpenAI, NVIDIA standing shoulder to shoulder with Trump. And if you listened closely behind the business speak, there was something else: respect. Genuine, unfiltered, unapologetic respect. Not like the fist bumps and sleepy press conferences of Biden's 2022 visit. Not like the diplomatic charades of the Obama years. This was different. This was business. This was power. This was leverage. Because Trump didn't come to scold. He didn't fly in on a mission to impose American values. He came to offer something more valuable than moral lectures opportunity. That's what the Investment Forum signaled, that America under Trump is open for business. Not just as a military partner, but as a strategic economic partner. And for once, the rest of the world isn't laughing. They're listening. Let's pause here. Because while the world was tuning into the numbers, they missed the bigger shift. This wasn't just about arms sales. This was about rewriting America's image from global policeman to global partner. And that change didn't come from speeches. It came from trust deals, and one brutally honest premise: the United States cannot win by playing everyone's savior, but it can win by playing smart. And that's what we saw next. Trump the peacemaker. Not the naive idealist, not the regime changer, but a realist offering something rare in modern foreign policy: an off-ramp. To Saudi Arabia, he extended an invitation. Join the Abraham Accords. Normalize relations with Israel. Shift the region's future from chaos to commerce. It wasn't a demand. It was a vision. Then came the message to Iran. A line drawn not in blood, but in logic. We will deal if you're willing to talk. But if you choose war, then we will apply pressure, maximum pressure, and take your oil exports to zero. And he meant it. Not because he hates Iran, but because he understands something Washington elites still don't. Diplomacy without leverage is just begging in a suit. And that brings us to a moment that Washington insiders find uncomfortable, but the rest of the world finds refreshing. Trump's boldness isn't chaos. It's calculation. His willingness to lift sanctions on Syria, to open dialogue, to say, let's talk before we bomb, that's not surrender. That's strategy. And whether it's Iran, Syria, or even the Gulf monarchies, Trump is executing a doctrine Washington abandoned long ago: use power but never waste it. Use peace but never beg for it. And that's what makes this era so unfamiliar. Because the people who used to chant no more war now want conflict, so long as it means undermining Trump. And the same journalists who once celebrated backdoor diplomacy now call it authoritarian if it doesn't come with a scolding from Harvard. But the results are hard to ignore. A region that once burned with fire is now humming with capital, and a former pariah America under Trump is suddenly being treated like the adult in the room. Why? Because he's not there to shape souls or impose ideologies. He's there to build wealth alliances and deterrence. Not for them, for us. And yet, while this happens abroad, something deeply broken is playing out at home. The same elites who cheered for war are now panicking over peace. The same networks that laughed at tariffs are now speechless as the economy rebounds. And the same courts they once weaponized are now reaffirming powers Trump always claimed under a law written before any of them were born. Yes, the Alien and Enemies Act. A law born in 1798. And a court in Pennsylvania just upheld Trump's right to use it to deport illegal immigrants deemed national security threats. It's not new. It's just that no one else had the guts to use it. And that's the real story here. Not that Trump is doing something extraordinary, but that Washington has forgotten what normal leadership looks like. Protect the borders, make deals, defend peace, not ideology, and don't apologize for being strong. But let's be clear, this isn't just about law and order. It's about vision. Because while Trump negotiates in the Middle East, his domestic critics are unraveling in the courts and Congress and on television. They told you he would tank the economy. They told you tariffs would destroy growth. They told you Biden was sharp as ever and any doubts were cheap fakes. And now, they're publishing exposés admitting they were lied to. They're turning on Biden in real time because they no longer can hide what's been obvious for years. A president who can't finish sentences. A commander-in-chief who forgot Clooney. A party that chose power over clarity and dragged the media with them. They called it compassion. They called it progress. But it was deception. And it wasn't just political. It was personal. Because while Biden stumbled through fundraisers, Trump walked off a plane in Riyadh, cracked a joke about chip dominance, and casually pointed out that America under his hand builds the best missiles in the world. Not to threaten, but to sell. Because that's the paradox Trump understands. When you lead with strength, you don't need to fire a shot. When you speak clearly, you don't need a media interpreter. And when your country is respected, doors open even in places that once cheered your demise. That's the Trump doctrine in motion: realism with leverage, commerce over conflict, and optimism that's disciplined, not delusional. And that optimism, strangely enough, is what enrages his critics the most. Because it's not performative. It's productive. It doesn't come with slogans or hashtags. It comes with balance sheets and flight manifests, and names like Jensen Huang seated beside him at a Saudi investment forum, not out of obligation, but out of interest, out of belief, out of business. And that's where things get uncomfortable for the establishment. Trump is making diplomacy look normal. He's talking to world leaders without giving them sermons. He's striking trade deals without giving away the farm. And he's restoring American influence not by begging for allies, but by offering returns. Because at the core of it all is a brutal truth they cannot swallow. Trump's foreign policy is working, and they're out of arguments. Remember Syria. That dusty, complicated war zone where Western intervention produced nothing but rubble. Trump lifts sanctions, extends a hand. Not because he trusts Assad, but because he trusts something even more dangerous: that continued failure is no longer an option. And as uncomfortable as that makes official Washington, from the neoconservatives to the cocktail class, the logic is hard to deny. What's the alternative? Decades of failed nation-building, trillions lost in sand. Generations of Americans sent to die for borders that shift like dunes. He asked a question no one else would. What if America stopped trying to moralize the world and just started negotiating with it? That's the shift. That's the threat. Not to national security, but to the professional class of diplomats and journalists who have made a living off of endless summits with no results. So now they cling to what's left. Scandals, indictments, narratives. And when that fails, they lie about their lies. They call truth misinformation. They label success authoritarian. And they pretend still that the sky is falling. But it's not. It's stabilizing. The stock market is recovering. Inflation is cooling. And new economic arteries are forming from Riyadh to Silicon Valley. And in the midst of it, a federal judge indicts another liberal darling, a state judge in Wisconsin, accused of helping an illegal immigrant escape ICE custody through the back door of her courtroom. This isn't a subplot. It's the counter-narrative. While Trump makes international deals, his opponents protect violent offenders. While he rebuilds alliances, they sabotage law enforcement. While he restores leverage, they chase shadows. And it's not just political, it's cultural. Because for years, the media insisted that Trump was the aberration, that they were the truth. But now the clips are undeniable. Biden stumbling off bikes, losing his train of thought mid-sentence, failing to recognize George Clooney at his own fundraiser. And what do the networks say? Cheap fakes. Out of context. Smear campaigns. Even after years of silence, the moment the narrative collapses, they rush to claim the scoop. But where were they in 2020? In 2022, where was the scrutiny then? Nowhere. Because it wasn't convenient. Because Biden's decline, though visible, was untouchable so long as it served the party line. And so, like co-conspirators in a silence pact, the press ignored the obvious. Until it became profitable not to. And now they're writing books about it, selling revelations they once suppressed, marketing integrity they never had. And that's where we reach the point of no return, not for Trump, but for them, for the media, for the party operatives posing as journalists, for the so-called thought leaders who confused groupthink for insight. Because this isn't just about Joe Biden forgetting names. It's about an entire ecosystem built on denial. And now that denial is cracking. And behind it, the real question looms, what else have they been lying about? When a president cannot recognize a global celebrity like George Clooney, even after being told his name out loud, that's not a slow day. That's not a cheap fake. That's deterioration. And when the most powerful press corps in the world hides it for years, that's not journalism. That's complicity. And now they want applause. Now they want credit for noticing what every American with a television already knew in 2020. No, the damage is done. Not just to the presidency, but to the credibility of every institution that wrapped it in silence. And yet, amid the collapse of narratives and poll-tested optics, Trump moves forward. While Biden was being ushered off stage, Trump was meeting with Jensen Huang, the man behind 99% of the AI chip market. While MSNBC was debating word slurs and misgendered adjectives, Trump was securing AI investments in the Middle East. And in case anyone forgot, he did it all without bowing to anyone, without apologizing, without hiding behind handlers, without needing a wheelchair. Because for Trump, there is no backup plan, no media safety net, no establishment firewall, just results. It's almost too poetic. A president the press mocked as dangerous is now the only one talking peace, the only one building bridges, the only one securing America's interests without sending troops to die. And yet the same people who once screamed no blood for oil are now furious that he's bringing the oil and the money home without blood. Because here's the quiet truth, Trump is succeeding without them. And they cannot stand it. That's why they attack. Not out of moral clarity, but out of professional extinction. Every win he secures, every deal he signs, every tariff that works is one more nail in the coffin of the post-9/11 foreign policy consensus. Because Trump's style is dangerous, not to the world, but to the club. The old boys club of think tanks, lobbyists, nation builders, and regime changers. The ones who saw America as a perpetual checkbook and the military as a global janitor. Trump is saying no. No more nation building, no more endless wars, no more apologies. And yes, that includes to South African refugees too, because here's the final layer of hypocrisy. For years, the left insisted we welcome all refugees. They told us our duty was to open our doors, open our hearts, no matter the cost. Until suddenly, 59 white South African farmers showed up, fleeing political violence, fleeing murder, fleeing land confiscation. And what happened? The same people who welcomed 100,000 unvetted Afghans who lobbied for open borders for Nicaraguans and Venezuelans suddenly decided these people didn't qualify. Why? Because they didn't fit the narrative. They weren't the right kind of oppressed. They didn't conform to the identity matrix. And so the Episcopal Church, which had accepted $50 million from the Biden administration to resettle migrants, suddenly refused to help. Think about that. 59 refugees, including children with nowhere to go. And America's progressive religious elite said, no thanks. Wrong skin color. So let's drop the charade. This was never about compassion. It was about politics, votes, control. And when refugees don't fit the demographic, they get left behind. And so we arrive at the ugliest contradiction of all. The party that claims to fight for the voiceless falls silent when the victims don't serve their cause. The same Democrats who marched for asylum seekers from every corner of the globe looked the other way when white South African farmers were being killed on their land, when their homes were seized, when chants like "Kill the Boer" echoed through rallies held by radical political groups in Johannesburg. No statements, no hashtags, no Hollywood tears, just silence. Because in the new moral arithmetic of the left, your right to safety, to freedom, to refuge is conditional. Not on your suffering, but on your symbolism. And if you happen to represent something they've pre-written as oppressive, even if you're the one being oppressed, you're out of luck. That's not justice. That's ideology weaponized. That's identity politics on steroids. And it's costing real people their lives while the media turns it into another footnote. So Trump stepped in. And what did he say? Welcome to the United States of America. Not as a political stunt, not to score points, but because he still believes that America, when properly led, should stand with those under siege regardless of the color of their skin. But that truth, too, was twisted. Pundits labeled it white nationalism. They accused him of playing to apartheid nostalgia. They smeared the refugees themselves as colonial descendants, as if the sins of long-dead regimes should now justify the murder of children and the seizure of farms. You see the logic here. They don't want to stop oppression. They just want to redistribute it, from one group to another, from one history to a new present, until everyone is guilty and no one is innocent. That's not equality. It's revenge rebranded. And again, it's Trump who breaks the cycle, not with slogans, but with clarity. Because here's the pattern they don't want you to notice. Every time the elites lose control of the story, they move the goalposts. First, it was no one wants tariffs. Now they say, well, okay, maybe the market is recovering. First, it was Trump will start World War III. Now it's okay he's brokering peace, but we don't like how he talks. First, it was Trump can't govern. Now it's, well, at least Biden isn't mean. And the latest, he's not really helping refugees. He's helping the wrong ones. The goalposts are gone. They've been melted down, turned into microphones, and handed to the same journalists who lied about Biden's condition covered for collapsing institutions, and now want to sell you a new story, a redemption arc for themselves. But redemption doesn't work that way. You don't get to ignore the truth for 4 years and then cash in when it becomes profitable. You don't get to label reality fake and then repackage it when your book deal demands it. And you certainly don't get to question Trump's fitness to lead while the current president forgets names, places, and basic policy details in full view of the nation. This isn't partisan, it's mathematical. The man they told you was finished is now writing the next chapter of global politics. The man they said would crash the system is now stabilizing it. And the man they accused of dividing the world is now uniting pieces of it through trade, through diplomacy, through sheer force of will. So here we are, watching in real time as Donald Trump redefines power on a global stage while the media tries to explain how they got everything so wrong. And the real question isn't about Trump anymore. It's about them. Can a system built on denial survive when denial no longer works? If you value this perspective, consider subscribing to Worldview today and sharing it with someone who still believes in critical thinking.